Chapter 5 of She and Allan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 5. Enis. We had sighted the house from far away shortly after sunrise, and by midday we were there. As we approached I saw that it stood almost immediately beneath two great baobab trees. Babian trees we call them in South Africa, perhaps because monkeys eat their fruit. It was a thatched house with whitewashed walls and a stoep or veranda around it, apparently of the ordinary Dutch type. Moreover, beyond it at a little distance were other houses, or rather shanties, with wagon sheds, etc., and beyond and mixed up with these a number of native huts. Further on were considerable fields, green with springing corn. Also we saw herds of cattle grazing on the slopes. Evidently our white man was rich. Umslopogaas surveyed the place with a soldier's eye and said to me, "This must be a peaceful country, Macumazahn, where no attack is feared, since of defence I see none." "Yes," I answered, "why not, with the wilderness behind it and bush veld and a great river in front?" "Men can cross rivers and travel through bush veld," he answered and was silent. Up to this time we had seen no one, although it might have been presumed that a waggon trekking towards the house was a sufficiently unusual sight to have attracted attention. "Where can they be?" I asked. "Asleep, Baas, I think," said Hans, and as a matter of fact he was right. The whole population of the place was indulging in a noonday siesta. At last we came so near to the house that I halted the waggon and descended from the driving box in order to investigate. At this moment someone did appear, the sight of whom astonished me not a little, namely a very striking looking young woman. She was tall, handsome, with large dark eyes, good features, a rather pale complexion, and I think the saddest face that I ever saw. Evidently she had heard the noise of the waggon and had come out to see what caused it, for she had nothing on her head, which was covered with thick hair of a raven blackness. Catching sight of the great Umslopogaas with his gleaming axe and of his savage looking bodyguard, she uttered an exclamation and not unnaturally turned to fly. "It's all right," I sang out, emerging from behind the oxen, and in English, though before the words had left my lips I reflected that there was not the slightest reason to suppose that she would understand them. Probably she was Dutch or Portuguese, although by some instinct I had addressed her in English. To my surprise she answered me in the same tongue, spoken, it is true, with a peculiar accent which I could not place, as it was neither Scotch nor Irish. "Thank you," she said. "I, sir, was frightened. Your friends look—" here she stumbled for a word, then added, "terrocious." I laughed at this composite adjective and answered, "Well, so they are in a way, though they will not harm you or me. But, young lady, tell me, can we outspun here? Perhaps your husband—" "I have no husband. I have only a father, sir," and she sighed. "Well, then, could I speak to your father? My name is Allan Quatermain, and I am making a journey of exploration to find out about the country beyond, you know." "Yes, I will go to wake him. He is asleep. Everyone sleeps here at midday, except me," she said with another sigh. "Why do you not follow their example?" I asked jocosely, for this young woman puzzled me and I wanted to find out about her. "Because I sleep little, sir, who thinks too much. There will be plenty of time to sleep soon for all of us, will there not?" I stared at her and inquired her name.
because I did not know what else to say. "My name is Enis Robertson," she answered. "I will go to wake my father. Meanwhile please unyoke your oxen. They can feed with the others. They look as though they wanted rest, poor things." Then she turned and went into the house. Enis Robertson, I said to myself. That's a queer combination. English father and Portuguese mother, I suppose. But what can an Englishman be doing in a place like this? If it had been a trek Boer I should not have been surprised. Then I began to give directions about outspanning. We had just got the oxen out of the yokes when a big, raw-boned, red-bearded, blue-eyed, roughly clad man about 50 years of age appeared from the house, yawning. I threw my eye over him as he advanced with a peculiar rolling gait, and formed certain conclusions. A drunkard who has once been a gentleman, I reflected to myself, for there was something peculiarly dissolute in his appearance. Also one who has had to do with the sea, a diagnosis which proved very accurate.
"How do you do, Mr. Allan Quatermain, which I think my daughter said is your name, unless I dreamt it, for it is one that I seem to have heard before," he exclaimed with a broad Scotch accent which I do not attempt to reproduce. "What in the name of the blaze brings you here, where no real white man has been for years?" "Well, I'm glad enough to see you anyway, for I'm sick of half-breed, Portuguese and niggers and snuff and butter girls and gin and bad whisky. Leave your people to attend to those oxen and come in and have a drink."
"Thank you, Mr. Robertson."
"Captain Robertson," he interrupted. "Man, don't look astonished. You mightn't guess it, but I commanded a mail steamer once and should like to hear myself called rightly again before I die."
"I beg your pardon, Captain Robertson, but myself, I don't drink anything before sundown. However, if you have something to eat—"
"Oh yes, Enis, she's my daughter, will find you a bite. Those men of yours," and he looked doubtfully at Umslopogaas and his savage company, "will want food as well. I'll have a beast killed for them. They look as if they could eat it, horns and all. Where are my people? All asleep, I suppose, the lazy lubbers. Wait a bit, I'll wake them up."
Going to the house he snatched a great sjambok cut from hippopotamus hide from where it hung on a nail in the wall, and ran towards the group of huts which I have mentioned, roaring out the name Thomaso, also a string of oaths such as seamen use, mixed with others of a Portuguese variety. What happened there I could not see because boughs were in the way, but presently I heard blows and screams and caught sight of people, all dark-skinned, flying from the huts. A little later a fat half-bred man, I should say from his curling hair that his mother was a negress and his father a Portuguese, appeared with some other nondescript fellows and began to give directions in competent fashion about our oxen, also as to the killing of a calf. He spoke in bastard Portuguese, which I could understand, and I heard him talk of Umslopogaas, to whom he pointed as "that nigger," after the fashion of such cross-bred people who choose to consider themselves white men. Also he made uncomplimentary remarks about Hans, who of course understood every word he said. Evidently Thomaso's temper had been ruffled by this sudden and violent disturbance of his nap. Just then our host appeared, puffing with his exertions, and declaring that he had stirred up the swine with a vengeance, in proof of which he pointed to the sjambok that was reddened with blood. "Captain Robertson," I said, "I wish to give you a hint to be passed on to Mr. Thomaso, if that is he. He spoke of the Zulu soldier there as a nigger, etc. Well, he is a chief of a high rank and rather a terrible fellow if roused. Therefore I recommend Mr. Thomaso not to let him understand that he is insulting him."
"Oh, that's the way of these snuff and butters, one whose grandmother once met a white man," replied the captain laughing. "But I'll tell him,"
and he did in Portuguese. His retainer listened in silence, looking at Umslopogaas rather sulkily. Then we walked into the house. As we went the captain said, "Señor Tommaso, he calls himself Señor, is my manager here, and a clever man, honest too in his way and attached to me, perhaps because I saved his life once. But he has a nasty temper, as have all these cross breeds, so I hope he won't get wrong with that native who carries a big axe." "I hope so too, for his own sake," I replied emphatically. The captain led the way into the sitting room. There was but one in the house. It proved a queer kind of place, with rude furniture seated with strips of hide after the Boer fashion, and yet bearing a certain air of refinement which was doubtless due to Enis, who, with the assistance of a stout native girl, was already engaged in setting the table. Thus there was a shelf with books. Shakespeare was one of these, I noticed, over which hung an ivory crucifix which suggested that Enis was a Catholic. On the walls too were some good portraits, and on the window ledge a jar full of flowers. Also the forks and spoons were of silver, as were the mugs, and engraved with a tremendous coat of arms and a Portuguese motto. Presently the food appeared, which was excellent and plentiful, and the captain, his daughter and I sat down and ate. I noted that he drank gin and water, an innocent looking beverage but strong as he took it. It was offered to me, but like Miss Inez I preferred coffee. During the meal and afterwards, while we smoked upon the veranda, I told them as much as I thought desirable of my plans. I said that I was engaged upon a journey of exploration of the country beyond the Zambesi, and that having heard of this settlement, which by the way was called Stratmore, as I gathered, after a place in far away Scotland, where the captain had been born and passed his childhood, I had come here to inquire as to how to cross the great river, and about other things. The captain was interested, especially when I informed him that I was that same hunter Quatermain of whom he had heard in past years. But he told me that it would be impossible to take the waggon down into the low bush veld which we could see beneath us, as there all the oxen would die of the bite of the tsetse fly. I answered that I was aware of this and proposed to try to make an arrangement to leave it in his charge till I returned.
"That might be managed, Mr. Quatermain," he answered, "but man, will you ever return? They say there are queer folk living on the other side of the Zambesi, savage men who are cannibals. Amahagger, I think they call them. It was they who in past years cleaned out all this country, except for a few river tribes who live in floating huts or on islands among the reeds, and that's why it is so empty. But this happened long ago, much before my time, and I don't suppose they will ever cross the river again."
"If I might ask, what brought you here, Captain?" I said, for the point was one on which I felt curious.
"That which brings most men to wild places, Mr. Quatermain, trouble. If you want to know, I had a misfortune and piled up my ship. There was some lives lost and rightly or wrongly I got the sack. Then I started as a trader in a god-forsaken hole named Chinde, one of the Zambesi mouths, you know, and did very well, as we Scotsmen have a way of doing. There I married a Portuguese lady, a real lady of high blood, one of the old sort. When my girl Enis was about 12 years old I got into more trouble, for my wife died, and it pleased a certain relative of hers to say that it was because I had neglected her. This ended in a row, and the truth is that I killed him. In fair fight, mind you, still killed him. I did, though I scarcely knew that I had done it at the time, after which the place grew too hot to hold me. So I sold up and swore that I would have no more to do with what they are pleased to call civilization on the East Coast." During my trading I had heard that there was a fine country up this way, and here I came and settled years ago, bringing my girl and Tommaso, who was one of my managers, also a few other people with me. And here I have been ever since, doing very well as before, for I trade a lot of ivory and other things and grow stuff and cattle, which I sell to the river natives. Yes, I'm a rich man now, and could go to live on my means in Scotland or anywhere." "Why don't you?" I asked.
"Oh, for many reasons. I've lost touch with all that and become a half wild, and I like this life and the sunshine and being my own master. Also, if I did, things might be raked up against me about that man's death. Also, though I dare say it will make you think badly of me for it, Mr. Quatermain, I have ties down there," and he waved his hand towards the village, if so it could be called, "which it wouldn't be easy for me to break. A man may be fond of his children, Mr. Quatermain, even if their skins ain't so white as they ought to be. Lastly, I have habits, you see. I'm speaking out to you as man to man, which might get me into trouble again if I went back to the world," and he nodded his fine, capable looking head in the direction of the bottle on the table. "I see," I said hastily, for this kind of confession bursting out of the man's lonely heart when what he had drunk took hold of him, was painful to hear. "But how about your daughter, Miss Inez?"
"Ah," he said with a quiver in his voice, "there you touch it. She ought to go away. There is no one for her to marry here, where we haven't seen a white man for years, and she's a lady right enough, like her mother. But who is she to go to, being a Roman Catholic, whom my own dour Presbyterian folk in Scotland, if any of them are left, would turn their backs on? Moreover, she loves me in her own fashion, as I love her, and she wouldn't leave me because she thinks it's her duty to stay, and knows that if she did I should go to the devil altogether. Still, perhaps you might help me about her, Mr. Quatermain. That is, if you live to come back from your journey," he added doubtfully.
I felt inclined to ask how I could possibly help in such a matter, but thought it wisest not to say nothing. This, however, he did not notice, for he went on.
"Now I think I will have a nap, as I do my work in the early morning and sometimes late at night when my brain seems to clear up again, for you see I was a sailor for many years and accustomed to keeping watches. You'll look after yourself, won't you, and treat the place as your own?"
Then he vanished into the house to lie down. When I had finished my pipe I went for a walk. First I visited the waggon, where I found Umslopogaas and his company engaged in cooking the beast that had been given them, Zulu fashion. Hans, with his usual cunning, had already secured a meal, probably from the servants or from Inez herself. At least he left them and followed me. First we went down to the huts, where we saw a number of good-looking young women of mixed blood, all decently dressed and engaged about their household duties. Also we saw 4 or 5 boys and girls, to say nothing of a baby in arms, fine young people, 1 or 2 of whom were more white than coloured.
"Those children are very like the Baas with the red beard," remarked Hans reflectively.
"Yes," I said, and shivered, for now I understood the awfulness of this poor man's case. He was the father of a number of half-breeds who tied him to this spot as anchors tie a ship. I went on rather hastily past some sheds to a long, low building which proved to be a store. Here the quarter blood called Tommaso and some assistants were engaged in trading with natives from the Zambesi swamps, men of a kind that I had never seen, but in a way more civilized than many further south. What they were selling or buying I did not stop to see, but I noticed that the store was full of goods of one sort or another. including a great deal of ivory, which, as I supposed, had come down the river from inland. Then we walked on to the cultivated fields, where we saw corn growing very well, also tobacco and other crops. Beyond this were cattle kraals, and in the distance we perceived a great number of cattle and goats feeding on the slopes. "This red-bearded Baas must be very rich in all things," remarked the observant Hans when we had completed our investigations. "Yes," I answered, "rich and yet poor." "How can a man be both rich and yet poor, Baas?" asked Hans. Just at that moment some of the half-bred children whom I have mentioned ran past us more naked than dressed and whooping like little savages. Hans contemplated them gravely, then said, "I think I understand now, Baas. A man may be rich in things he loves and yet does not want, which makes him poor in other ways." "Yes," I answered, "as you are, Hans, when you take too much to drink." Just then we met the stately Miss Inez returning from the store, carrying some articles in a basket, soap, I think, and tea in a packet amongst them. I told Hans to take the basket and bear it to the house for her. He went off with it and, walking slowly, we fell into conversation. "Your father must do very well here," I said, nodding at the store with a crowd of natives round it. "Yes," she answered, "he makes much money, which he puts in a bank at the coast, for living costs us nothing, and there is great profit in what he buys and sells, also in the crops he grows and in the cattle. But," she added pathetically, "what is the use of money in a place like this?" "You can get things with it," I answered vaguely. "That is what my father says, but what does he get? Strong stuff to drink, dresses for those women down there, and sometimes pearls, jewels and other things for me which I do not want. I have a box full of them set in ugly gold, or loose, which I cannot use, and if I put them on, who is there to see them? That clever half-breed Thomaso, for he is clever in his way, faithful too, or the women down there, no one else." "You do not seem to be happy, Miss Inez." "No, I cannot tell how unhappy others are, who have met none, but sometimes I think that I must be the most miserable woman in the world." "Oh no," I replied cheerfully, "plenty are worse off." "Then, Mr. Quatermain, it must be because they cannot feel. Did you ever have a father whom you loved?" "Yes, Miss Inez. He is dead, but he was a very good man, a kind of saint. Ask my servant, the little Hottentot Hans, he will tell you about him." "Ah, a very good man. Well, as you may have guessed, mine is not, though there is much good in him, for he has a kind heart and a big brain. But the drink and those women down there, they ruin him," and she wrung her hands. "Why don't you go away?" I blurted out. "Because it is my duty to stop. That is what my religion teaches me, although of it I know little except through books, who have seen no priest for years except one who was a missionary, a Baptist, I think, who told me that my faith was false and would lead me to hell. Yes, not understanding how I live, he said that, who did not know that hell is here. No, I cannot go, who hopes always that still God and the saints will show me how to save my father, even though it be with my blood. And now I have said too much to you who are quite a stranger. Yet I do not know why, I feel that you will not betray me, and what is more, that you will help me if you can, since you are not one of those who drink or—" and she waved her hand towards the huts. "I have my faults, Miss Inez," I answered. "Yes, no doubt, else you would be a saint, not a man, and even the saints had their faults, or so I seem to remember, and became saints by repentance and conquering them. Still, I am sure that you will help me if you can." Then, with a sudden flash of her dark eyes that said more than all her words, she turned and left me. Here's a pretty kettle of fish, thought I to myself as I strolled back to the wagon to see how things were going on there. And how to get the live fish out of the kettle before they boil or spoil is more than I know. I wonder why fate is always finding me such jobs to do. Even as I thought thus, a voice in my heart seemed to echo that poor girl's words, because it is your duty, and to add others to them. Woe betide him who neglects his duty. I was appointed to try to hook a fish out of the vast kettle of human woe, and therefore I must go on hooking. Meanwhile this particular problem seemed beyond me. Perhaps fate would help, I reflected. As a matter of fact, in the end fate did, if fate is the right word to use in this connection. End of chapter 5 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander.
Of She and Allan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 6. The Sea Cow Hunt. Now it had been my intention to push forward across the river at once, but here luck, or our old friend Fate, was against me. To begin with, several of Umslopogaas' men fell sick with a kind of stomach trouble, arising no doubt from something they had eaten. This, however, was not their view, or that of Umslopogaas himself. It happened that one of these men, Goroko by name, who practised as a witch doctor in his lighter moments, naturally suspected that a spell had been cast upon them, for such people see magic in everything. Therefore he organized a smelling out, at which Umslopogaas, who was as superstitious as the rest, assisted. So did Hans, although he called himself a Christian, partly out of curiosity, for he was as curious as a magpie, and partly from fear lest some implication should be brought against him in his absence. I saw the business going on from a little distance, and, unseen myself, thought it well to keep an eye upon the proceedings in case anything untoward should occur. This I did with Miss Enis, who had never witnessed anything of the sort, as a companion. The circle, a small one, was formed in the usual fashion. Goroko, rigged up in the best witch doctor's costume that he could improvise, duly came under the influence of his spirit, and skipped about waving a wild beastie's tail, and so forth. Finally, to my horror, he broke out of the ring, and running to a group of spectators from the village, switched Thomaso, who was standing among them with a lordly and contemptuous air, across the face with a gnu's tail, shouting out that he was the wizard who had poisoned the bowels of the sick men. Thereon Thomaso, who although he could be insolent like most crossbreeds, was not remarkable for courage, seeing the stir that this announcement created amongst the fierce-faced Zulus, and fearing developments, promptly bolted, none attempting to follow him. After this, just as I thought that everything was over, and that the time had come for me to speak a few earnest words to Umslopogaas, pointing out that matters must go no further as regards Thomaso, whom I knew that he and his people hated, Goroko went back to the circle and was seized with a new burst of inspiration. Throwing down his whisk, he lifted his arms above his head and stared at the heavens. Then he began to shout out something in a loud voice which I was too far off to catch. Whatever it may have been, evidently it frightened his hearers, as I could see from the expression on their faces. Even Umslopogaas was alarmed, for he let his axe fall for a moment, rose as though to speak, then sat down again and covered his eyes with his hands. In a minute it was over. Goroko seemed to become normal, took some snuff, and, as I guessed, after the usual fashion of these doctors, began to ask what he had been saying while the spirit possessed him, which he either had or affected to have forgotten. The circle too broke up, and its members began to talk to each other in a subdued way, while Umslopogaas remained seated on the ground, brooding, and Hans slipped away in his snake-like fashion, doubtless in search of me. "What was it all about, Mr. Quatermain?" asked Enis. "Oh, a lot of nonsense," I said. "I fancy that Witch Doctor declared that your friend Thomaso put something into those men's food to make them sick." "I dare say that he did. It would be just like him, Mr. Quatermain, as I know that he hates them, especially Umslopogaas, of whom I am very fond. He brought me some beautiful flowers this morning which he had found somewhere, and made a long speech which I could not understand. The idea of Umslopogaas, that man of blood and iron, bringing flowers to a young lady, was so absurd that I broke out laughing, and even the sad-faced Enis smiled. Then she left me to see about something, and I went to speak to Hans and asked him what had happened. "Something rather queer, I think, Baas," he answered vacuously, "though I did not quite understand the last part. The Doctor Goroko smelt out Thomaso as the man who had made them sick, and though they will not kill him because we are guests here, those Zulus are very angry with Thomaso, and I think will beat him if they get a chance. But that is only the small half of the stick," and he paused. "What is the big half then?" I asked with irritation. "Baas, the spirit in Goroko." "The jackass in Goroko, you mean," I interrupted. "How can you, who are a Christian, talk such rubbish about spirits? I only wish that my father could hear you." "Oh, Baas, your reverend father, the Predikant, is now wise enough to know all about spirits, and that there are some who come into black witch doctors, though they turn up their noses at white men and leave them alone. However, whatever it is that makes Goroko speak got hold of him so that his lips said, though he remembered nothing of it afterwards, that soon this place would be red with blood, that there would be a great killing here, Baas. That is all." "Red with blood? Whose blood? What did the fool mean?" "I don't know, Baas, but what you call the jackass in Goroko declared that those who are with the Great Medicine, meaning what you wear, Baas, will be quite safe. So I hope that it will not be our blood. Also that you will get out of this place as soon as you can." Well, I scolded Hans because he believed in what this doctor said, for I could see that he did believe it, then went to question Umslopogaas, whom I found looking quite pleased, which annoyed me still more. "What is it that Goroko has been saying, and why do you smile, Bulalio?" I asked. "Nothing much, Macumazahn, except that the man who looks like tallow that has gone bad, put something in our food which made us sick, for which I would kill him were he not Redbeard's servant, and that it would frighten the lady his daughter. Also he said that soon there will be fighting, which is why I smiled, who grow weary of peace. We came out to fight, did we not?" "Certainly not," I answered. "We came out to make a quiet journey in strange lands, which is what I mean to do." "Ah well, Macumazahn, in strange lands one meets strange men with whom one does not always agree, and then Inkosikaas begins to talk," and he whirled the great axe round his head, making the air whistle as it was forced through the gouge at his back. I could not get more out of him, so having extracted a promise from him that nothing should happen to Thomaso, who I pointed out was probably quite unjustly accused, I went away. Still the whole incident left a disagreeable impression on my mind, and I began to wish that we were safe across the Zambesi without more trouble. But we could not start at once, because two of the Zulus were still not well enough to travel, and there were many preparations to be made about the loads, and so forth, since the waggon must be left behind. Also, and this was another complication, Hans had a sore upon his foot, resulting from the prick of a poisonous thorn, and it was desirable that this should be quite healed before we marched. So it came about that I was really glad when Captain Robertson suggested that we should go down to a certain swamp formed, I gathered, by some small tributary of the Zambesi, to take part in a kind of hippopotamus battue. It seemed that at this season of the year the great animals always frequented the place in numbers, also that by barring a neck of deep water through which they gained it, they, or a proportion of them, could be cut off and killed. This had been done once or twice in the past, though not of late, perhaps because Captain Robertson had lacked the energy to organize such a hunt. Now he wished to do so again, taking advantage of my presence, both because of the value of the hides of the sea cows which were cut up to be sent to the coast and sold as sjamboks or whips, and because of the sport of the thing. Also I think he desired to show me that he was not altogether sunk in sloth and drink. I fell in with the idea readily enough, since in all my hunting life I had never seen anything of the sort, especially as I was told that the expedition would not take more than a week, and I reckoned that the sick men and Hans would not be fit to travel sooner. So great preparations were made. The riverside natives, whose share of the spoil was to be the carcasses of the slain sea cows, were summoned by hundreds and sent off to their appointed stations to beat the swamps at the signal given by the firing of a great pile of reeds. Also many other things were done upon which I need not enter. Then came the time for us to depart to the appointed spot over 20 miles away, most of which distance it seemed we could trek in the waggon. Captain Robertson, who for the time had cut off his gin, was as active about the affair as though he were once more in command of a mail steamer. Nothing escaped his attention. Indeed, in the care which he gave to details, he reminded me of the captain of a great ship that is leaving port, and from it I learnt how able a man he must once have been. "Does your daughter accompany us?" I asked on the night before we started. "Oh no," he answered, "she would only be in the way. She will be quite safe here, especially as Thomaso, who is snow hunter, remains in charge of the place, with some of the older natives to look after the women and children." Later I saw Enis herself, who said that she would have liked to come, although she hated to see great beasts killed, but that her father was against it because he thought she might catch fever. So she supposed that she had better remain where she was. I agreed, though in my heart I was doubtful, and said that I would leave Hans, whose foot was not as yet quite well, and with whom she had made friends, as she had done with Umslopogaas, to look after her. Also there would be with him the 2 great Zulus, who were now recovering from their attack of stomach sickness, so that she would have nothing to fear. She answered with her slow smile that she feared nothing, still she would have liked to come with us. Then we parted, as it proved, for a long time. It was quite a ceremony. Umslopogaas, in the name of the Axe, solemnly gave over Enis to the charge of his 2 followers, bidding them to guard her, with so much earnestness that I began to suspect he feared something which he did not choose to mention. My mind went back indeed to the prophecy of the Witch Doctor Goroko, of which it was possible that he might be thinking. But as while he spoke, he kept his fierce eyes fixed upon the fat and pompous quarter-bred Thomaso, I concluded that here was the object of his doubts. It might have occurred to him that this Thomaso would take the opportunity of her father's absence to annoy Inez. If so, I was sure that he was mistaken for various reasons, of which I need only quote one, namely that even if such an idea had ever entered his head, Thomaso was far too great a coward to translate it into action. Still, suspecting something, I also gave Hans instructions to keep a sharp eye on Inez and generally to watch the place, and if he saw anything suspicious, to communicate with us at once. "Yes, Baas," said Hans, "I will look after Sad Eyes." For so, with their usual quickness of observation, our Zulus had named Inez, "as though she were my grandmother, though what there is to fear for her I do not know. But, Baas, I would much rather come and look after you, as your reverend father, the Predikant, told me to do always, which is my duty, not girl herding, Baas. Also my foot is now quite well and I want to shoot sea cows and—" here he paused. "And what, Hans?" And Goroko said that there was going to be much fighting, and if there should be fighting and you should come to harm because I was not there to protect you, what would your reverend father think of me then?" All of which meant two things: that Hans never liked being separated from me if he could help it, and that he much preferred a shooting trip to stopping alone in this strange place with nothing to do except eat and sleep. So I concluded, though indeed I did not get quite to the bottom of the business. In reality Hans was putting up a most gallant struggle against temptation. As I found out afterwards, Captain Roberts had been giving him strong drink on the sly, moved thereto by sympathy with a fellow toper. Also he had shown him where, if he wanted it, he could get more, and Hans always wanted gin very badly indeed. To leave it within his reach was like leaving a handful of diamonds lying about in the room of a thief. This he knew, but was ashamed to tell me the truth, and thence came much trouble. "You will stop here, Hans, look after the young lady and nurse your foot," I said sternly, whereon he collapsed with a sigh and asked for some tobacco. Meanwhile Captain Robertson, who I think had been taking a stirrup cup to cheer him on the road, was making his farewells down in what was known as the village, for I saw him there kissing a collection of half-bred children and giving Thomaso instructions to look after them and their mothers. Returning at length, he called to Enis, who remained upon the veranda, for she always seemed to shrink from her father after his visits to the village, to keep a stiff upper lip and not feel lonely, and commanded the cavalcade to start. So off we went, about 20 of the village natives, a motley crew armed with every kind of gun, marching ahead and singing songs. Then came the wagon with Captain Robertson and myself seated on the driving box, and lastly Umslopogaas and his Zulus, except the two who had been left behind. We trekked along a kind of native road over fine veld of the same character as that on which Stratmore stood, having the lower lying bush veld which ran down to the Zambesi on our right. Before nightfall we came to a ridge whereon this bush veld turned south, fringing that tributary of the great river in the swamps of which we were to hunt for sea cows. Here we camped, and next morning, leaving the wagon in charge of my voorlooper and a couple of the Stratmore natives, for the driver was to act as my gun bearer, we marched down into the sea bush veld. It proved to be full of game, but at this we dared not fire for fearing of disturbing the hippopotami in the swamps beneath, whence in that event they might escape us back to the river. About midday we passed out the bush veld and reached the place where the drive was to be. Here, bordered by the steep banks, covered with bush, was swampy ground not more than 200 yards wide, down the centre of which ran a narrow channel, or rather deep water, draining a vast expanse of morass above. It was up this channel that the sea cows travelled to the feeding ground, where they loved to collect at that season of the year. There, with the assistance of some of the riverside natives, we made our preparations under the direction of Captain Robertson. The rest of these men, to the number of several hundreds, had made a wide detour to the head of the swamps, miles away, whence they were to advance at a certain signal. These preparations were simple. A quantity of thorn trees were cut down, and by means of heavy stones fastened to their trunks, anchored in the narrow channel of deep water. To their tops, which floated on the placid surface, were tied a variety of rags which we had brought with us, such as old red flannel shirts, gay coloured but worn out blankets, and I know not what besides. Some of these fragments also were attached to the anchored ropes under water. Also we selected places for the guns upon the steep banks that I have mentioned, between which this channel ran. Foreseeing what would happen, I chose one for myself behind a particularly stout rock, and what is more, built a stone wall to the height of several feet on the landward side of it, as I guessed that the natives posted near to me would prove wild in their shooting. These labours occupied the rest of that day, and at night we retired to higher ground to sleep. Before dawn on the following morning we returned and took up our stations, some on one side of the channel and some on the other, which we had to reach in a canoe brought for the purpose by the river natives. Then, before the sun rose, Captain Robertson fired a huge pile of dried reeds and bushes, which was to give the signal to the river natives far away to begin their beat. This done, we sat down and waited, after making sure that every gun had plenty of ammunition ready. As the dawn broke, by climbing a tree near my schanze or shelter, I saw a good many miles away to the south a wide circle of little fires, and guessed that the natives were beginning to burn the dry seeds of the swamp. Presently these fires drew together into a thin wall of flame. Then I knew that it was time to return to the schanze and prepare. It was full daylight, however, before anything happened. Watching the still channel of water, I saw ripples on it and bubbles of air rising. Suddenly there appeared the head of a great bull hippopotamus, which, having caught sight of our rag barricade either above or below water, had risen to the surface to see what it might be. I put a bullet from an 8-bore rifle through its brain, whereon it sank, I guessed stone dead, to the bottom of the channel, thus helping to increase the barricade by the bulk of its great body. Also it had another effect. I have observed that sea cows cannot bear the smell and taint of blood, which frightens them horribly, so that they will expose themselves to almost any risk rather than get it into their nostrils. Now in this still water, where there was no perceptible current, the blood from the dead bull soon spread all about, so that when the herd following their leader began to arrive, they were much alarmed. Indeed, the first of them, on winding or tasting it, turned and tried to get back up the channel, where, however, they met others following, and there ensued a tremendous confusion. They rose to the surface, blowing, snorting, bellowing and scrambling over each other in the water, while continually more and more arrived behind them, till there was a perfect pandemonium in that narrow place. All our guns opened fire wildly upon the mass. It was like a battle, and through the smoke I caught sight of the riverside natives, who were acting as beaters, advancing far away, fantastically dressed, screaming with excitement and waving spears or sometimes torches of flaming reeds. Most of these were scrambling along the banks, but some of the bolder spirits advanced over the lagoon in canoes, driving the hippopotami towards the mouth of the channel, by which alone they could escape into the great swamps below and so on to the river. In all my hunting experience I do not think I ever saw a more remarkable scene. Still, in a way, to me it was unpleasant, for I flatter myself that I am a sportsman, and a battle of this sort is not sport as I understand the term. At length it came to this. The channel for quite a long way was literally full of hippopotami. I should think there must have been 100 of them or more, of all sorts and sizes, from great bulls down to little calves. Some of these were killed, not many, for the shooting of our gallant company was execrable and almost at hazard. Also for every sea cow that died, of which number I think that Captain Robertson and myself accounted for most, many were only wounded. Still the unhappy beasts, crazed with noise and fire and blood, did not seem to dare to face our frail barricade, probably for the reason that I have given. For a while they remained massed together in the water or under it, making a most horrible noise. Then of a sudden they seemed to take a resolution. A few of them broke back towards the burning reeds, the screaming bearers and the advancing canoes. One of these, indeed, a wounded bull, charged a canoe, crushed it in its huge jaws and killed the rower. How exactly I do not know, for his body was never found. The majority of them, however, took another counsel, for emerging from the water on either side, they began to scramble towards us along the steep banks, or even climbing up them with surprising agility. It was at this point in the proceedings that I congratulated myself earnestly upon the solid character of the water-worn rock which I had selected as a shelter. Behind this rock, together with my gun-bearer and Umslopogaas, who, as he did not shoot, had elected to be my companion, I crouched and banged away at the unwieldy creatures as they advanced. But fire fast as I might with 2 rifles, I could not stop the half of them. They were drawing unpleasantly near. I glanced at Umslopogaas and even then was amused to see that probably for the first time in his life that redoubtable warrior was in a genuine fright.
"This is madness, Macumazahn," he shouted above the din. "Are we to stop here and be stamped flat by a horde of water pigs?"
"It seems so," I answered, "unless you prefer to be stamped flat outside or eaten," I added, pointing to a great crocodile that had also emerged from the channel and was coming along towards us with open jaws.
"By the axe," shouted Umslopogaas again, "I, a warrior, will not die thus, trodden on like a slug by an ox."
Now I have mentioned a tree which I climbed. In his extremity Umslopogaas rushed for that tree and went up it like a lamplighter, just as the crocodile wriggled past its trunk, snapping at his retreating legs. After this I took no more note of him, partly because of the advancing sea cows, and more for the reason that one of the village natives posted above me, firing wildly, put a large round bullet through the sleeve of my coat. Indeed, had it not been for the wall which I built that protected us, I am certain that both my bearer and I would have been killed, for afterwards I found it splashed over with lead from bullets which had struck the stones. Well, thanks to the strength of my rock and to the wall, or as Hans said afterwards, to Zikali's great medicine, we escaped unhurt. The rush went by me. Indeed, I killed one sea cow so close that a powder from the rifle actually burned its hide, but it did go by, leaving us untouched. All, however, were not so fortunate, since of the village natives 2 were trampled to death, while a third had his leg broken. Also, and this was really amusing, a bewildered bull charging at full speed crashed into the trunk of Umslopogaas' tree and, as it was not very thick, snapped it in two. Down came the top, in which the dignified chief was ensconced like a bird in a nest, though at that moment there was precious little dignity about him. However, except for scratches, he was not hurt, as the hippopotamus had other business in urgent need of attention and did not stop to settle with him.
"Such are the things which happen to a man who mixes himself up with matters of which he knows nothing," said Umslopogaas sententiously out to me afterwards. But all the same he could never bear any allusion to this tree climbing episode in his martial career, which as it happened had taken place in full view of his retainers, among whom it remained the greatest of jokes. Indeed, he wanted to kill a man, the wag of the party, who gave him a slang name, which, being translated, means "he who is so brave that he dares to ride a water horse up a tree." It was all over at last, for which I thanked Providence devoutly. A good many of the sea cows were dead. I think 21 was out exact bag, but the majority of them had escaped in one way or another, many, as I fear, wounded. I imagine that at the last the bulk of the herd overcame its fears and swimming through our screen, passed away down the channel. At any rate they were gone, and having ascertained that there was nothing to be done for the man who had been trampled on my side of the channel, I crossed in the canoe with the object of returning quietly to our camp to rest. But as yet there was to be no quiet for me, for there I found Captain Robertson, who I think had been refreshing himself out of a bottle and was in great state of excitement about a native who had been killed near him who was a favourite of his, and another whose leg was broken. He declared vehemently that the hippopotamus which had done this had been wounded and rushed into some bushes a few hundred yards away, and that he meant to take vengeance upon it. Indeed, he was just setting off to do so. Seeing his agitated state, I thought it wisest to follow him. What happened need not to be set out in detail. It is sufficient to say that he found that hippopotamus and blazed both barrels at it in the bushes, hitting it, but not seriously. Out lumbered the creature with its mouth open, wishing to escape. Robertson turned to fly as he was in its path, but from one cause or another tripped and fell down. Certainly he would have been crushed beneath its huge feet, had I not stepped in front of him and sent 2 solid 8-bore bullets down that yawning throat, killing it dead within 3 feet of where Robertson was trying to rise, and I may add, of myself. This narrow escape sobered him, and I am bound to say that his gratitude was profuse. "You are a brave man," he said, and had it not been for you, by now I should be wherever bad people go. I'll not forget it, Mr. Quatermain, and if ever you want anything that John Robertson can give, why, it's yours." "Very well," I answered, being seized by an inspiration. "I do want something that you can give easily enough." "Give it a name and it is yours, half my place if you like." "I want," I went on as I slipped new cartridges into the rifle, "I want you to promise to give up drink, for your daughter's sake. That's what nearly did for you just now, you know." "Man, you ask a hard thing," he said slowly, "but by God, I'll try for her sake and for yours too." Then I went to help set the leg of the injured man, which was all the rest I got that morning. End of chapter 6 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander.
7 of She and Allan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 7. The Oath. We spent 3 more days at that place. First it was necessary to allow time to elapse before the gases which generated in their great bodies caused those of the sea cows which had been killed in the water to float. Then they must be skinned and their thick hides cut into stripes and pieces to be traded for sjamboks, or to make small native shields, for which some of the East Coast tribes will pay heavily. All this took a long while, during which I amused or disgusted myself in watching those river natives devouring the flesh of the beasts. The lean, what there was of it, they dried and smoked into a kind of biltong, but a great deal of the fat they ate at once. I had the curiosity to weigh a lump which was given to one thin, hungry looking fellow. It scaled quite 20 pounds. Within 4 hours he had eaten it to the last ounce, and lay there a distended and torpid log. What would not we white people give for such a digestion? At last all was over, and we started homewards, the man with a broken leg being carried in a kind of litter. On the edge of the bush veld we found the waggon, quite safe, also one of Captain Robertson's that had followed us from Stratmore, in order to carry the expected load of hippopotamus hides and ivory. I asked my voorlooper if anything had happened during our absence. He answered nothing, but on the previous evening after dark he had seen a glow in the direction of Stratmore, which lay on somewhat lower ground about 20 miles away, as though numerous fires had been lighted there. It struck him so much, he added, that he climbed a tree to observe it better. He did not think, however, that any building had been burnt there, as the glow was not strong enough for that. I suggested that it was caused by some grass fire or reed burning, to which he replied indifferently that he did not think so, as the line of the glow was not sufficiently continuous. There the matter ended, though I confess that the story made me anxious, for what exact reason I could not say. Umslopogaas also, who had listened to it, for our talk was in Zulu, looked grave, but made no remark. But as since his tree climbing experience he had been singularly silent, of this I thought little. We had trekked at a time which we calculated would bring us to Stratmore about an hour before sundown, allowing for a short halt half-way. As my oxen were got in more quickly than those of the other waggon after this outspan, I was the first away, followed at a little distance by Umslopogaas, who preferred to walk with the Zulus. The truth was that I could not get that story about the glow of fires out of my mind, and was anxious to push on, which had caused me to hurry up the inspanning. Perhaps we had covered a couple of miles of the 10 or 12 which still lay between us and Stratmore, when far off on the crest of one of the waves of the veld, which must resemble those of the swelling sea frozen while in motion, I saw a small figure approaching us at a rapid trot. Somehow that figure suggested Hans to my mind, so much so that I fetched my glasses to examine it more closely. A short scrutiny through them convinced me that Hans it was, Hans and no other, advancing at great pace. Filled with uneasiness, I ordered the driver to flog up the oxen, with the result that in a little over 5 minutes we met. Halting the waggon, I leapt from the waggon box and calling to Umslopogaas, who had kept up with us at a slow swinging trot, went to Hans, who, when he saw me, stood still at a little distance, swinging his apology for a hat in his hand, and, as was his fashion when ashamed or perplexed. "What is the matter, Hans?" I asked, when we were within speaking distance.
"Oh, Baas, everything,"
he answered, and I noticed that he kept his eyes fixed upon the ground and that his lips twitched. "Speak, you fool, and in Zulu," I said, for by now Umslopogaas had joined me.
"Baas," he answered in that tongue, "a terrible thing has come about at the farm of Red Beard yonder. Yesterday afternoon, at the time when people are in the habit of sleeping there till the sun grows less hot, a body of great men with fierce faces who carried big spears, perhaps there were 50 of them, Baas, crept up to the place through the long grass and growing crops and attacked it."
"Did you see them come?" I asked.
"No, Baas, I was watching at a little distance as you bade me do, and the sun being hot, I shut my eyes to keep out the glare of it, so that I did not see them until they had passed me and heard the noise."
"You mean that you were asleep or drunk, Hans. But go on."
"Baas, I do not know," he answered shamefacedly, "but after that I climbed a tall tree with a kind of bush at the top of it."
I ascertained afterwards that this was a sort of leafy crowned palm.
"And from it I saw everything without being seen."
"What did you see, Hans?" I asked him.
"I saw the big men run up and make a kind of circle round the village. Then they shouted, and the people in the village came out to see what was the matter. Thomaso and some of the men caught sight of them first and ran away fast into the hillside at the back where the trees grow, before the circle was complete. Then the women and the children came out, and the big men killed them with their spears. All.
"Good God!" I exclaimed. "And what happened at the house and to the lady?"
"Baas, some of the men had surrounded that also, and when she heard the noise the lady Sad Eyes came out on to the stoep, and with her came the 2 Zulus of the Axe, who had been left sick but were now quite recovered. A number of the big men ran as though to take her, but the 2 Zulus made a great fight in front of the little steps of the stoep, having their backs protected by the stoep, and killed 6 of them before they themselves were killed. Also Sad Eyes shot one with a pistol she carried and wounded another so that the spear fell out of his hand. Then the rest fell on her and tied her up, setting her in a chair on the stoep, where 2 remained as to watch her. They did her no hurt, Baas. Indeed, they seemed to treat her as gently as they could. Also they went into the house and there they caught that tall fat yellow girl who always smiles and is called Janee, she who waits upon the lady Sad Eyes, and brought her out to her. I think they told her, Baas, that she must look after her mistress and that if she tried to run away she would be killed, for afterwards I saw Janee bring her food and other things."
"And then, Hans?"
"Then, Baas, most of the great men rested a while, though some of them went through the store, gathering such things as they liked, blankets, knives and iron cooking pots, but they set fire to nothing, nor did they try to catch the cattle. Also they took dry wood from the pile and lit big fires, 8 or 9 of them, and when the sun set they began to feast."
"What did they feast on, Hans?
if they took no cattle?" I asked with a shiver, for I was afraid of I knew not what. "Baas," answered Hans, turning his head away and looking at the ground, "they feasted on the children whom they had killed, also on some of the young women. These tall soldiers are man-eaters, Baas." At this horrible intelligence I turned faint and felt as though I was going to fall, but recovering myself, signed to him to go on with his story. "They feasted quite nicely, Baas," he continued, "making no noise. Then some of them slept while others watched, and that went on all night. As soon as it was dark, but before the moon rose, I slid down the tree and crept round to the back of the house without being seen or heard, as I can, Baas. I got into the house by the back door and crawled to the window of the sitting room. It was opened, and peeping through I saw Sad Eyes still tied to the seat on the stoep not more than a pace away, while the girl Janee crouched on the floor at her feet. I think she was asleep or fainting. I made a little noise like a night adder hissing, and kept on making it till at last Sad Eyes turned her head. Then I spoke in a very low whisper, for fear lest I should wake the two guards who were dozing on either side of her wrapped in their blankets, saying, 'It is I, Hans, come to help you.' 'You cannot,' she answered, also speaking very low. 'Get to your master and tell him and my father to follow. These men are called Amahagger and live far away across the river. They are going to take me to their home, as I understand, to rule them, because they want a white woman to be a queen over them who have always been ruled by a certain white queen against whom they have rebelled. I do not think they mean to do me any harm, unless perhaps they want to marry me to their chief, but of this I am not sure from their talk, which I understand badly. Now go, before they catch you.' 'I think you might get away,' I whispered back. 'I will cut your bonds. When you are free, slip through the window and I will guide you.' 'Very well, try it,' she said. So I drew my knife and stretched out my arm. If the Great Medicine had still been there I might have known better. I forgot the starlight which shone upon the blade of the knife. That girl Janee came out of her sleep or swoon, lifted her head and saw the knife. She screamed once, then at a word from her mistress was silent. But it was enough, for it woke up the guards who glared about them and threatened Janee with their great spears. Also they went to sleep no more, but began to talk together, though what they said I could not hear, for I was hiding on the floor of the room. After this, knowing that I could do no good and might do harm and get myself killed, I crept out of the house as I had crept in, and crawled back to my tree." "Why did you not come to me?" I asked. "Because I still hoped I might be able to help Sad Eyes, Baas. Also I wanted to see what happened, and I knew that I could not bring you here in time to be any good. Yes, it is true I thought of coming, though I did not know the road." "Perhaps you were right." "At the first dawn," continued Hans, "the great men who are called Amahagger rose and ate what was left over from the night before. Then they gathered themselves together and went to the house. Here they found a large chair, that seated with rimpis, in which the Baas Red Beard sits, and lashed two poles to the chair. Beneath the chair they tied the garments and other things of the lady Sad Eyes, which they made Janee gather, as Sad Eyes directed her. This done, very gently they sat Sad Eyes herself in the chair, bowing while they made her fast. After this 8 of them set the poles upon their shoulders, and they all went away at a trot, heading for the bush veld, driving with them a herd of goats which they had stolen from the farm, and making Janee run by the chair. I saw everything, Baas, for they passed just beneath my tree. Then I came to seek you, following the outward spoor of the waggons, which I could not have done well at night. That is all, Baas." "Hans," I said, "you have been drinking, and because of it the lady Sad Eyes is taken a prisoner by cannibals, for had you been awake and watching, you might have seen them coming and saved her and the rest. Still, afterwards you did well, and for the rest you must answer to Heaven." I must tell your reverend father, the predicant Baas, that the white master, Red Beard, gave me the liquor, and it is rude not to do as a great white master does and drink it up. I am sure he will understand, Baas," said Hans abjectly. I thought to myself that it was true, and that the spear which Robertson cast had fallen upon his own head, as the Zulus say, but I made no answer, lacking time for argument.
"Did you say," asked Umslopogaas, speaking for the first time, "that my servants killed only 6 of these men-eaters?"
Hans nodded and answered,
"Yes, 6. I counted the bodies."
"It was ill done. They should have killed 6 each," said Umslopogaas moodily. "Well, they have left the more for us to finish," and he fingered the great axe. Just then Captain Robertson arrived in his waggon, calling out anxiously to know what was the matter, for some premonition of evil seemed to have struck him. My heart sank at the sight of him, for how was I to tell such a story to the father of the murdered children and of the abducted girl? In the end I felt that I could not. Yes, I turned coward, and saying that I must fetch something out of the waggon, bolted into it, bidding Hans go forward and repeat his tale. He obeyed unwillingly enough, and looking out between the curtains of the waggon tent I saw all that happened, though I could not hear the words that passed. Robertson had halted the oxen and jumping from the waggon box strode forward and met Hans, who began to speak with him, twitching his hat in his hands. Gradually, as the tale progressed, I saw the captain's face freeze into a mask of horror. Then he began to argue and deny, then to weep. Oh, it was a terrible sight to see that great man weeping over those whom he had lost, and in such a fashion. After this a kind of blind rage seized him, and I thought he was going to kill Hans, who was of the same opinion, for he ran away. Next he staggered about shaking his fists, cursing and shouting, till presently he fell of a heap and lay face downwards, beating his head against the ground and groaning. Now I went to him and sat up. "That's a pretty story, Quatermain, which this little yellow monkey has been gibbering at me. Man, do you understand what he says? He says that all those half-blood children of mine are dead, murdered by savages from over the Zambesi. Yes, and eaten too, with their mothers. Do you take the point? Eaten like lambs. Those fires your man saw last night were the fires on which they were cooked. My little so and so and so and so," and he mentioned half a dozen different names. "Yes, cooked, Quatermain, and that isn't all of it. They have taken Enis too. They didn't eat her, but they have dragged her off a captain for God knows what reason. I couldn't understand. The whole ship's crew is gone, except the captain absent on leave and the first officer, Thomaso, who deserted with some Lascar stalkers and left the women and children to their fate. My God, I'm going mad. I'm going mad. If you have any mercy in you, give me something to drink." "All right," I said, "I will. Sit here and wait a minute." Then I went to the waggon and poured out a stiff tot of spirits, into which I put an amazing dose of bromide from a little medicine chest I always carry with me, and 30 drops of chlorodyne on the top of it. All this compound I mixed up with a little water and took it to him in a tin cup, so that he could not see the colour. He drank it at a gulp, and throwing the pannikin aside, sat down on the veld, groaning, while the company watched him at a respectful distance, for Hans had joined the others and his tail had spread like fire in drought-parched grass. In a few minutes the drugs began to take effect upon Robertson's tortured nerves, for he rose and said quietly, "What now?" "Vengeance, or rather justice," I answered. "Yes," he exclaimed, Vengeance. I swear that I will be avenged or die, or both."
Again I saw my opportunity and said, "You must swear more than that, Robertson. Only sober men can accomplish great things, for drink destroys the judgment. If you wish to be avenged for the dead and to rescue the living, you must be sober, or I for one will not help you."
"Will you help me if I do, to the end, good or ill, Quatermain?" he added.
I nodded.
"That's as much as another's oath," he muttered. "Still, I will put my thought in words. I swear by God, by my mother, like these natives, and by my daughter, born in honest marriage, that I will never touch another drop of strong drink until I have avenged those poor women and their little children, and rescued Enis from their murders. If I do, you may put a bullet through me."
"That's all right," I said in an offhand fashion, though inwardly I glowed with pride at the success of my great idea, for at the time I thought it great, and went on. "Now let us get to business. The first thing to do is to trek to Stratmore and make preparations, the next to start upon the trail. Come to sit on the waggon with me and tell me what guns and ammunition you have got, for according to Hans those savages don't seem to have touched anything except a few blankets and a herd of goats." He did as I asked, telling me all he could remember. Then he said,
"It is a strange thing, but now I recall that about 2 years ago a great savage with a high nose, who talked a sort of Arabic, which, like Enis I understand, having lived on the coast, turned up one day and said he wanted to trade. I asked him what in, and he answered that he would like to buy some children. I told him that I was not a slave dealer. Then he looked at Enis, who was moving about, and said that he would like to buy her to be a wife for his chief, and offered some fabulous sum in ivory and in gold, which he said should be paid before she was taken away. I snatched his big spear from his hand, broke it over his head and gave him the best hiding with its shaft that he had ever heard of. Then I kicked him off the place. He limped away, but when he was out of reach, turned and called out that one day he would come again with others and take her, meaning Enis, without leaving the price in ivory and gold. I ran for my gun, but when I got back he'd gone and I never thought of the matter again from that day to this." "Well, he kept his promise," I said, but Robertson made no answer, for by this time that thundering dose of bromide and laudanum had taken effect upon him and he had fallen asleep, of which I was glad, for I thought that this sleep would save his sanity, as I believe it did for a while. We reached Stratmore towards sunset, too late to think of attempting the pursuit that day. Indeed, during our trek I had thought the matter out carefully and come to the conclusion that to try to do so would be useless. We must rest and make preparations. Also there was no hope of our overtaking these brutes, who already had a clear 12 hours start by a sudden spurt. They must be run down patiently by following their spoor, if indeed they could be run down at all before they vanished into the vast recesses of unknown Africa. The most we could do this night was to get ready. Captain Robertson was still sleeping when we passed the village, and of this I was heartily glad, since the remains of a cannibal feast are not pleasant to behold, especially when they are. Indeed, of these I determined to be rid at once. So slipping off the waggon with Hans and some of the farm boys, for none of the Zulus would defile themselves by touching such human remnants, I made up 2 of the smouldering fires, the light of which the voorlooper had seen upon the sky, and on to them cast, or caused to be cast, those poor fragments. Also I told the farm natives to dig a big grave and in it to place the other bodies, and generally to remove the traces of murder.
Then I went on to the house, and not too soon. Seeing the waggons arrive and having made sure that the Amahagger were gone, Thomaso and the other cowards emerged from their hiding places and returned. Unfortunately for the former, the first person he met was Umslopogaas, who began to revile the fat half-breed in no measured terms, calling him dog, coward and other opprobrious names, such as deserter of women and children, and so forth, all of which someone translated. Thomaso, an insolent person, tried to swagger the matter out, saying that he had gone to get assistance. Infuriated at this lie, Umslopogaas leapt upon him with a roar, and though he was a strong man, dealt with him as a lion does with a buck. Lifting him from his feet, he hurled him to the ground. Then, as he strove to rise and run, caught him again and, as it seemed to me, was about to break his back across his knee. Just at this juncture I arrived. "Let the man go," I shouted to him. "Is there not enough death here already?"
Yes, answered Umslopogaas, I think there is. Best that this jackal should live to eat his own shame.
And he cast Thomaso to the ground, where he lay groaning. Robertson, who was still asleep in the waggon, woke up at the noise and descended from it, looking dazed. I got him to the house and in doing so made my way past, or rather between the bodies of the two Zulus and of the 6 men whom they had killed, also of him whom Enis had shot. Those Zulus had made a splendid fight, for they were covered with wounds, all of them in front, as I found upon examination. Having made Robertson lie down upon his bed, I took a good look at the slain Amahagger. They were magnificent men, all of them, tall, spare and shapely, with very clear-cut features and rather frizzled hair. From these characteristics, as well as the lightness of their colour, I concluded that they were of a Semitic or Arab type, and that the admixture of their blood with that of the Bantus was but slight, if indeed there were any at all. Their spears, of which one had been cut through by a blow of a Zulu's axe, were long and broad, not unlike those used by the Masai, but of finer workmanship. By this time the sun was setting, and thoroughly tired by all that I had gone through, I went into the house to get something to eat, having told Hans to find food and prepare a meal. As I sat down, Robertson joined me, and I made him also eat. His first impulse was to go to the cupboard and fetch the spirit bottle. Indeed, he rose to do so. "Hans is making coffee," I said warningly.
Thank you, he answered. I forgot. Force of habit, you know.
Here I may state that never from that moment did I see him touch another drop of liquor, not even when I drank my modest tot in front of him. His triumph over temptation was splendid and complete, especially as the absence of his accustomed potations made him ill for some time, and of course depressed his spirits, with painful results that were apparent in due course. In fact, the man became totally changed. He grew gloomy but resourceful, also full of patience. Only one idea obsessed him: to rescue his daughter and avenge the murder of his people. Indeed, except his sins, he thought of and found interest in nothing else. Moreover, his iron constitution cast off all the effects of his past debauchery, and he grew so strong that although I was pretty tough in those days, he could out-tire me. To return, I engaged him in conversation and with his help made a list of what we should require on our vendetta journey, all of which served to occupy his mind. Then I sent him to bed, saying that I would call him before dawn, having first put a little more bromide into his third cup of coffee. After this I turned in, and notwithstanding the sight of those remains of the cannibal feast and the knowledge of the dead men who lie outside my window, I slept like a top. Indeed, it was the captain who awakened me, not I the captain, saying that daylight was on the break and we had better be stirring. So we went down to the store, where I was thankful to find that everything had been tidied up in accordance with my directions. On our way Robertson asked me what had become of the remains, whereon I pointed to the smouldering ashes of one of the great fires. He went to it and kneeling down said a prayer in broad Scotch, doubtless one that he had learnt at his mother's knee. Then he took some of the ashes from the edge of the pyre, for such it was, and threw them into the glowing embers where, as he knew, lay all that was left of those who had sprung from him. Also he tossed others of them into the air, though what he meant by this I did not understand, and never asked. Probably it was some rite indicative of expiation or of revenge, or both, which he had learnt from the savages among whom he had lived so long. After this we went into the store and with the help of some of the natives or half-breeds who had accompanied us on the sea cow expedition, selected all the goods we wanted, which we sent to the house. As we returned thither I saw Umslopogaas and his men engaged with the usual Zulu ceremonies in burying their two companions in a hole they had made in the hillside. I noted, however, that they did not inter their war axes or their throwing spears with them as usual, probably because they thought that these might be needed. In place of them they put with the dead little models roughly shaped of bits of wood, which models they killed by first breaking them across. I lingered to watch the funeral and heard Goroko, the witch doctor, make a little speech. "O Father and Chief of the Axe," he said, addressing Umslopogaas, who stood silent leaning on his weapon and watching all, a portentous figure in the morning mist. "O Father, O Son of the Heavens." This was an allusion to the royal blood of Umslopogaas, of which the secret was well known, although it would never have been spoken aloud in Zululand. "O slaughterer Bulalio, O woodpecker who picks the hearts of men, O king slayer, O conqueror of the Halakasi, O victor in 100 fights, O gatherer of the lily bloom that faded in the hand, O wolf man, captain of the wolves that ravened, O slayer of the Faku, O great one whom it pleases to seem small, because he must follow his blood to the end appointed." This was the opening of the speech, the bongaing or giving of titles of praise to the person addressed, of which I have quoted but a sample, for there were many more of them that I have forgotten. Then the speaker went on. "It was told to me, though of it I remember nothing, that when my spirit was in me a while ago, I prophesied that this place would flow with blood, and lo! the blood has flowed, and with it that of these our brothers," and he gave the names of the two dead Zulus, also those of their forefathers for several generations. "It seems, Father, that they died well, as you would have wished them to die, and as doubtless they desired to die themselves, leaving a tale behind them, though it is true that they might have died better, killing more of the men-eaters, as it is certain they would have done, had they not been sick inside. They are finished, they have gone beyond to await us in the underworld among the ghosts. Their story is told, and soon to their children they will be but names whispered in honour after the sun has set. Enough of them who have showed us how to die as our fathers did before them." Goroko paused a while, then added with a waving of his hands, "My spirit comes to me again, and I know that these our brothers shall not pass unavenged. Chief of the Axe, great glory awaits the Axe, for it shall feed full. I have spoken." "Good words," grunted Umslopogaas. Then he saluted the dead by raising Inkosikaas and came to me to consult about our journey. End of chapter 7 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander.
Fate of She and Allan.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain.
For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 8. Pursuit. After all, we did not get away much before noon, because first there was a great deal to be done. To begin with, the loads had to be arranged. These consisted largely of ammunition, everything else being cut down to an irreducible minimum. To carry them we took 2 donkeys there were on the place, also half a dozen pack oxen, all of which animals were supposed to be salted, that is, to have suffered and recovered from every kind of sickness, including the bite of the deadly tsetse fly. I suspected, it is true, that they would not be proof against further attacks, still I hoped that they would last for some time, as indeed proved to be the case. In the event of the beasts failing us, we took also 10 of the best of those Stratmore men who had accompanied us on the sea cow trip, to serve as bearers when it became necessary. It cannot be said that these snuff and butter fellows, for most if not all of them had some dash of white blood in their veins, were exactly willing volunteers. Indeed, if a choice had been left to them, they would, I think, have declined this adventure. But there was no choice. Their master, Robertson, ordered them to come, and after a glance at the Zulus, they concluded that the command was one which would be enforced, and that if they stopped behind it would not be as living men. Also some of them had lost wives and children in the slaughter, which, if they were not very brave, filled them with a desire for revenge. Lastly, they could all shoot after a fashion and had good rifles. Moreover, if I may say so, I think that they put confidence in my leadership. So they made the best of a bad business and got themselves ready. Then arrangements must be made about the carrying on of the farm and store during our absence. These, together with my wagon and oxen, were put in the charge of Thomaso, since there was no one else who could be trusted at all. A very battered and crestfallen Thomaso, by the way. When he heard of it he was much relieved, since I think he feared lest he also should be expected to take part in the hunt of the Amahagger man-eaters. Also it may have occurred to him that in all probability none of us would ever come back at all, in which case, by a process of natural devolution, he might find himself the owner of the business and much valuable property. However, he swore by sundry saints, for Thomaso was nominally a Catholic, that he would look after everything as though it were his own, as no doubt he hoped it might become.
"Hearken, fat pig," said Umslopogaas, Hans obligingly translating so that there might be no mistake. "If I come back, and come back I shall, who travel with the Great Medicine, and find even one of the cattle of the White Lord, Macumazahn, Watcher by Night, missing, or one article stolen from his wagon, or the fields of your master not cultivated, or his goods wasted, I swear by the axe that I will hew you into pieces with the axe. Yes, if to do it I have to hunt you from where the sun rises to where it sets, and down the length of the night between. Do you understand, fat pig? Deserter of women and children, who to save yourself could run faster than a buck."
Thomaso replied that he understood very clearly indeed, and that Heaven helping him, all should be kept safe and sound. Still I was sure that in his manly heart he was promising great gifts to the saints if they would so arrange matters that Umslopogaas and his axe were never seen at Stratmore again, and reflecting that after all the Amahagger had their uses. However, as I did not trust him in the least, much against their will, I left my driver and voorlooper to guard my belongings. At last we did get off, pursued by the fervent blessings of Thomaso and the prayers of the others that we would avenge their murdered relatives. We were a curious and motley procession. First went Hans, because at following a spoor he was, I believe, almost unequalled in Africa, and with him Umslopogaas and 3 of his Zulus to guard against surprise. These were followed by Captain Robertson, who seemed to prefer to walk alone and whom I thought it best to leave undisturbed. Then I came, and after me straggled the Stratmore boys with the pack animals, the cavalcade being closed by the remaining Zulus under the command of Goroko. These walked last in case any of the mixed bloods should attempt to desert, as we thought it quite probable that they would. Less than an hour's tramp brought us to the bush-veld where I feared that our troubles might begin, since if the Amahagger were cunning, they would take advantage of it to confuse or hide their spoor. As it chanced, however, they had done nothing of the sort, and a child could have followed their march. Just before nightfall we came to their first halting place, where they had made a fire and eaten one of the herd of farm goats, which they had driven away with them, although they left the cattle. I suppose because goats are docile and travel well. Hans showed us everything that had happened, where the chair in which Enis was carried was set down, where she and Janee had been allowed to walk that she might stretch her stiff limbs, the dregs of some coffee that evidently Janee had made in a saucepan, and so forth. He even told us the exact number of the Amahagger, which he said totalled 41, including the man whom Enis had wounded. His spoor he distinguished from that of the others both by an occasional drop of blood and because he walked lightly on his right foot, doubtless for the reason that he wished to avoid jarring his wound, which was on that side. At this spot we were obliged to stay till daybreak, since it was impossible to follow the spoor by night, a circumstance that gave the cannibals a great advantage over us. The next 2 days were repetitions of the first, but on the 4th we passed out of the bush-veld into the swamp country that bordered the great river. Here our task was still easy, since the Amahagger had followed one of the paths made by the river dwellers, who had their habitations on mounds, though whether these were natural or artificial I am not sure, and sometimes on floating islands. On our 2nd day in the reeds we came upon a sad sight. To our left stood one of these mound villages, if a village it could be called, since it consisted only of 4 or 5 huts inhabited perhaps by 20 people. We went up to it to obtain information and stumbled across the body of an old man lying in the pathway. A few yards further on we found the ashes of a big fire and by it such remains as we had seen at Stratmore. Here there had been another cannibal feast. The miserable huts were empty, but as at Stratmore had not been burnt. We were going away when the acute ears of Hans caught the sound of groans. We searched about, and in a clump of reeds near the foot of the mound we found an old woman with a great spear wound just above her skinny thigh, piercing deep into the vitals, but of a nature which is not immediately mortal. One of Robertson's people, who understood the language of these swamp dwellers well, spoke to her. She told him that she wanted water. It was brought and she drank copiously. Then in an answer to his question she began to talk. She said that the Amahagger had attacked the village and killed all who could not escape. They had eaten a young woman and 3 children. She had been wounded by a spear and fled away into the place where we found her, where none of them took the trouble to follow her, as she was not worth eating. By my direction the man asked her whether she knew anything of these Amahagger. She replied that her grandfathers had, though she had heard nothing of them since she was a child, which must have been 70 years before. They were a fierce people who lived far up north across the great river, the remnants of a race that had once ruled the world. Her grandfathers used to say that they were not always cannibals, but had become so long before because of a lack of food, and now had acquired the taste. It was for this purpose that they still raided, to get other people to eat, since their ruler would not allow them to eat one another. The flesh of cattle they did not care for, although they had plenty of them, but sometimes they ate goats and pigs, because they said they tasted like man. According to her grandfathers they were a very evil people and full of magic. All of this the old woman told us quite briskly after she had drunk the water. I think because her wound had mortified and she felt no pain. Her information, however, as is common with the aged, dealt entirely with the far past. Of the history of the Amahagger since the days of her forebears she knew nothing, nor had she seen anything of Enis. All she could tell us was that some of them had attacked her village at dawn, and that when she ran out of the hut she was spared. While Robertson and I were wondering what we should do with the poor old creature, whom it seemed cruel to leave here to perish, she cleared up the question by suddenly expiring before our eyes. Uttering the name of someone with whom doubtless she had been familiar in her youth 3 or 4 times over, she just sank down and seemed to go to sleep, and on examination we found that she was dead. So we left her and went on. Next day we came to the edge of the great river, here a sheet of placid running water about a mile across, for at this time of the year it was low. Perceiving quite a big village on our left, we went to it and made enquiries, to find that it had not been attacked by the cannibals, probably because it was too powerful, but that 3 nights before some of their canoes had been stolen, in which no doubt these had crossed the river. As the people of this village had traded with Robertson and Stratmore, we had no difficulty in obtaining other canoes from them in which to cross the Zambesi in return for one of our oxen that I could see was already sickening from tsetse bite. These canoes were large enough to take the donkeys that were patient creatures and stood still, but the cattle we could not get into them for fear of an upset. So we killed the 2 driven beasts that were left to us and took them with us as dead meat for food, while the 3 remaining pack oxen we tried to swim across, dragging them after the canoes with hide rheims round their horns. As a result 2 were drowned, but one, a bold-hearted and enterprising animal, gained the other bank. Here again we struck a sea of reeds in which, after casting about, Hans once more found the spoor of the Amahagger. That it was theirs beyond doubt was proved by the circumstance that on a thorny kind of weed we found a fragment of cotton dress which, because of the pattern stamped on it, we all recognized as one of that Enis had been wearing. At first I thought that this had been torn off by the thorns, but on examination we became certain that it had been placed there purposely, probably by a Janee, to give us a clue. This conclusion was confirmed when at subsequent periods of the hunt we found other fragments of the same garment. Now it would be useless for me to set out the details of this prolonged and arduous chase, which in all endured for something over 3 weeks. Again and again we lost the trail and were only able to recover it by long and elaborate search, which occupied much time. Then, after we escaped from the reeds and swamps, we found ourselves upon stony uplands where the spoor was almost impossible to follow. Indeed, we only rediscovered it by stumbling across the dead body of that cannibal whom Enis had wounded. Evidently he had perished from his hurt, which I could see had mortified. From the state of his remains we gathered that the raiders must be about 2 days' march ahead of us. Striking their spoor again on softer ground, where the impress of their feet remained, at any rate to the cunning sight of Hans, we followed them down across great valleys wherein trees grew sparsely, which valleys were separated from each other by ridges of high and barren land. On these belts of rocky soil our difficulties were great, but here twice we were put on the right track by more fragments torn from the dress of Enis. At length we lost the spoor altogether, not a sign of it was to be found. We had no idea which way to go. All about us appeared these valleys covered with scattered bush running this way and that, so that we could not tell which of them to follow or to cross. The thing seemed hopeless, for how could we expect to find a little body of men in that immensity? Hans shook his head
and even the fierce and steadfast Robertson was discouraged. "I fear my poor lassie is gone," he said, and relapsed into brooding as had become his wont. "Never say die, it's dogged as does it," I replied cheerfully in the words of Nelson, who also had learnt what it meant to hunt an enemy over trackless waters, although his were of water. I walked to the top of the rise where we were encamped, and sat down alone to think matters over. Our condition was somewhat parlous. All our beasts were now dead, even the second donkey, which was the last of them, having perished that morning and been eaten, for food was scanty since of late we had met with little game. The Stratmore men who now must carry the loads were almost worn out and doubtless would have deserted, except for the fact that there was no place to which they could go. Even the Zulus were discouraged and said they had come away from home across the great river to fight, not to run about in wildernesses and starve, though Umslopogaas made no complaint, being buoyed up by the promise of his soothsayer Goroko that battle was ahead of him in which he would win great glory. Hans, however, remained cheerful, for the reason, as he remarked vacuously, that the Great Medicine was with us, and that therefore, however bad things seemed to be, all in fact was well, an argument that carried no conviction to my soul. It was on a certain evening towards sunset that I went away thus alone. I looked about me, east and west and north. Everywhere appeared the same bush-clad valleys and barren rises, miles upon miles of them. I bethought me of the map that old Zikali had drawn in the ashes, and remembered that it showed these valleys and rises, and that beyond them there should be a great swamp, and beyond the swamp a mountain. So it seemed that we were on the right road to the home of the White Queen, if such a person existed, or at any rate we were passing over country similar to that which he had pictured or imagined. But at this time I was not troubling my head about White Queens. I was thinking of poor Enis, that she was alive a few days before we knew from the fragments of her dress. But where was she now? The spoor was utterly lost on that stony ground, or if any traces of it remained, a heavy deluge of rain had washed them away. Even Hans had confessed himself beaten. I stared about me helplessly, and as I did so a flying ray of light from the setting sun, reflected downwards from a storm cloud, fell upon a white patch on the crest of one of the distant land waves. It struck me that probably limestone outcropped at this spot, as indeed proved to be the case. Also that such a patch of white would be a convenient guide for any who were travelling across that sea of bush. Further, some instinct within seemed to impel me to steer for it, although I had all but made up my mind to go in a totally different direction many more points to the east. It was almost as though a voice were calling to me to take this path and no other. Doubtless this was an effect produced by weariness and mental overstrain. Still, there it was, very real and tangible, one that I did not attempt to combat. So next morning at the dawn I headed north by west, laying my course for that white patch and for the first time breaking the straight line of our advance. Captain Robertson, whose temper had not been bettered by prolonged and frightful anxiety, or I may add, by his unaccustomed abstinence, asked me rather roughly why I was altering the course. "Look here, Captain," I answered, "if we were at sea and you did something of the sort, I should not put such a question to you, and if by any chance I did, I should not expect you to answer. Well, by your own wish I am in command here, and I think that the same argument holds." "Yes," he replied, "I suppose you have studied your chart, if there is any of this God-forsaken country, and at any rate discipline is discipline. So steam ahead and don't mind me." The others accepted my decision without comment. Most of them were so miserable that they did not care which way we went, also they were good enough to repose confidence in my judgment.
"Doubtless the Baas has reasons," said Hans dubiously. "Although the spoor when last we saw it headed towards the rising sun, and as the country is all the same, I do not see why those man eaters should have returned." "Yes," I said, "I have reasons, although in fact I had none at all." Hans surveyed me with a watery eye as though waiting for me to explain them, but I looked haughty and declined to oblige. "The Baas has reasons," continued Hans, "for taking us on what I think to be the wrong side of that great ridge, there to hunt for the spoor of the men eaters, and they are so deep down in his mind that he cannot dig them up for poor old Hans to look at. Well, the Baas wears the Great Medicine, and perhaps it is there that the reasons sit. Those Stratmore fellows say that they can go no further and wish to die. Umslopogaas has just gone to them with his axe to tell them that he is ready to help them to their wish. Look, he is got there, for they are coming quickly, who after all prefer to live." Well, we started for my white patch of stones which no one else had noticed and of which I said nothing to anyone, and reached it by the following evening, to find, as I expected, that it was a lime outcrop. But now we were in a poor way, for we had practically nothing left to eat, which did not tend to raise the spirits of the party. Also that lime outcrop proved to be an uninteresting spot overlooking a wide valley which seemed to suggest that there were other valleys of a similar sort beyond it, and nothing more. Captain Robertson sat stern-faced and despondent at a distance, muttering into his beard, as had become a habit with him. Umslopogaas leaned upon his axe and contemplated the heavens, also occasionally by the Stratmore men who cowered beneath his eye. The Zulus squatted about sharing such snuff as remained to them in economic pinches. Goroko, the witch doctor, engaged himself in consulting his spirit by means of bone throwing upon the humble subject of whether or no we should succeed in killing any game for food tomorrow, a point on which I gathered that his spirit was quite uncertain. In short, the gloom was deep and universal, and the sky looked as though it were going to rain. Hans became sarcastic, sneaking up to me in his most aggravating way, like a dog that means to steal something and cover up the theft with simulated affection. He pointed out one by one all the disadvantages of our present position. He indicated per contra that if his advice had been followed, his conviction was that even if we had not found the man-eaters and rescued the lady called Sad Eyes, our state would have been quite different. He was sure, he added, that the valley which he had suggested we should follow was one full of game, inasmuch as he had seen their spoor at its entrance. "Then why did you not say so?" I asked. Hans sucked at his empty corn-cob pipe, which was his way of indicating that he would like me to give him some tobacco, much as a dog groans heavily under the table when he wants a bit to eat, and answered that it was not for him to point out things to one who knew everything, like the great Macumazahn, Watcher by Night, his honoured master. Still, the luck did seem to have gone a bit wrong. The privations could have been put up with. Here he sucked very loudly at the empty pipe and looked at mine, which was alight. Everything could have been put up with, if only there had been a chance of coming even with those men-eaters and rescuing the Lady Sad Eyes, whose face haunted his sleep. As it was, however, he was convinced that by following the course I had mapped out, we had lost their spoor finally, and that probably they were now 3 days' march away in another direction. Still, the Baas had said that he had his reasons, and that of course was enough for him. Hans, only if the Baas would condescend to tell him, he would as a matter of curiosity like to know what the reasons were. At that moment I confess that, much as I was attached to him, I should have liked to murder Hans, who I felt, believing that he had me on toast, to use a vulgar phrase, was taking advantage of my position to make a mock of me in his sly Hottentot way. I tried to continue to look grand,
but felt that the attitude did not impress. Then I stared about me as though taking counsel with the heavens, devoutly hoping that the heavens would respond to my mute appeal. As a matter of fact they did. "There is my reason, Hans," I said in my most icy voice, and I pointed to a faint line of smoke rising against the twilight sky on the further side of the intervening valley. "You will perceive, Hans," I added, "that those Amahagger cannibals have forgotten their caution and lit a fire yonder, which they have not done for a long time. Perhaps you would like to know why this has happened. If so, I will tell you. It is because for some days past I have purposely lost their spoor, which they knew we were following, and lit fires to puzzle them. Now, thinking that they have done with us, they have become incautious and shown us where they are. That is my reason, Hans." He heard, and although of course he did not believe that I had lost the spoor on purpose, stared at me till I thought his little eyes were going to drop out of his head. But even in his admiration he contrived to convey an insult as only a native can.
"How wonderful is the great medicine of the Opener of Roads, that it should have been able thus to instruct the Baas," he said. "Without doubt the Great Medicine is right, and yonder those men-eaters are encamped, who might just as well as have been anywhere else within 100 miles."
"Drat the Great Medicine," I replied, but beneath my breath, then added aloud, "Be so good, Hans, as to go to Umslopogaas and to tell him that Macumazahn of the Great Medicine proposes to march at once to attack the camp of the Amahagger, and here is some tobacco."
"Yes, Baas,"
answered Hans humbly, as he snatched the tobacco and wriggled away like a worm. Then I went to talk with Robertson. The end of it was that within an hour we were creeping across that valley towards the spot where I had seen the line of smoke rising against the twilight sky. Somewhere about midnight we reached the neighbourhood of this place. How near or how far we were from it we could not tell, since the moon was invisible, as of course the smoke was in the dark. Now the question was, what should we do? Obviously there would be enormous advantages in a night attack, or at least in locating the enemy, so that it might be carried out at dawn before he marched. Especially was this so since we were scarcely in a condition, even if we could come face to face with them, to fight these savages when they were prepared and in the light of day. Only we two white men with Hans, Umslopogaas and his Zulus could be relied upon in such a case, since the Stratmore mixed bloods had become entirely demoralized and were not to be trusted at a pinch. Indeed, tired and half starving as they were, none of us was at his best. Therefore a surprise seemed our only chance. But first we must find those whom we wished to surprise. Ultimately, after a hurried consultation, it was agreed that Hans and I should go forward and see if we could locate the Amahagger. Robertson wished to come too, but I pointed out that he must remain to look after his people, who if he left them might take the opportunity to melt away in the darkness, especially as they knew that heavy fighting was at hand. Also, if anything happened to me, it was desirable that one white man should remain to lead the party. Umslopogaas too volunteered, but knowing his character, I declined his help. To tell the truth, I was almost certain that if we came upon the men-eaters, he would charge the whole lot of them and accomplish a fine but futile end after hacking down a number of cannibal barbarians, whose extinction or escape remained absolutely immaterial to our purpose, namely the rescue of Enis. So it came about that Hans and I started alone, I not at all enjoying the job. I suppose that there lurks in my nature some of that primeval terror of the dark, which must continually have haunted our remote forefathers of 100 or 1,000 generations gone, and still lingers in the blood of most of us. At any rate, even if I am named the Watcher by Night,
Greatly do I prefer to fight or to face peril in the sunlight, though it is true that I would rather avoid both at any time. In fact, I wished heartily that the Amahagger were at the other side of Africa, or in heaven, and that I, completely ignorant of the person called Inez Robertson, were seated smoking the pipe of peace on my own stoep in Durban. I think that Hans guessed my state of mind, since he suggested that he should go alone, adding with his usual unveiled rudeness that he was quite certain that he would do much better without me, since white men always made a noise. Yes, I replied, determined to give him a Roland for his Oliver. I have no doubt you would, under the first bush you came across, where you would sleep till dawn, and then return and say that you could not find the Amahagger. Hans chuckled, quite appreciating the joke, and having thus mutually affronted each other, we started on our quest. End of chapter 8 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander.
The 9 of She and Allan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 9. The Swamp. Neither Hans nor I carried rifles that we knew would be in the way on our business, which was just to scout. Moreover, one is always tempted to shoot if a gun is at hand, and if this I did not want to do at present. So, although I had my revolver in case of urgent necessity, my only other weapon was a Zulu axe that formerly had belonged to one of those two men who died defending Enis on the veranda at Stratmore, while Hans had nothing but his long knife. Thus armed or unarmed, we crept forward towards the spot whence, as we conjectured, we had seen the line of smoke rising some hours before. For about a quarter of a mile we went on thus without seeing or hearing anything, and a difficult job it was in that gloom among the scattered trees with no light, save such as the stars gave us. Indeed, I was about to suggest that we had better abandon the enterprise until daybreak, when Hans nudged me, whispering, "Look to the right, between those twin thorns." I obeyed and, following the line of sight which he had indicated, perceived at a distance of about 200 yards a faint glow, so faint indeed that I think only Hans would have noticed it. Really it might have been nothing more than the phosphorescence rising from a heap of fungus, or even from a decaying animal. "The fire of which we saw the smoke that has burnt to ashes," whispered Hans again. "I think that they have gone, but let us look." So we crawled forward very cautiously to avoid making the slightest noise, so cautiously indeed that it must have taken us nearly half an hour to cover those 200 yards. At length we were within about 40 yards of that dying fire and, afraid to go further, came to a stand, or rather a lie still, behind some bushes until we knew more. Hans lifted his head and sniffed with his broad nostrils. Then he whispered into my ear, but so low that I could scarcely hear him. "Amahagger there all right, Baas. I smell them." This of course was possible, since that what wind there was blew from the direction of the fire, although I, whose nose is fairly keen, could smell nothing at all. So I determined to wait and watch a while, and indicated my decision to Hans, who, considering our purpose accomplished, showed signs of wishing to retreat. Some minutes we lay thus, till of a sudden this happened. A branch of resinous wood, of which the stem had been eaten through by the flames, fell upon the ashes of the fire and burnt up with a brilliant light. In it we saw that the Amahagger were sleeping in a circle round the fire, wrapped in their blankets. Also we saw another thing, namely that nearer to us, not more than a dozen yards away indeed, was a kind of little tent, also made of fur rugs or blankets, which doubtless sheltered Inez. Indeed, this was evident from the fact that at the mouth of it, wrapped up in something, lay none other than her maid Janee, for her face being towards us was recognised by us both in the flare of the flaming branch. One more thing we noted, namely that two of the cannibals, evidently a guard, were sleeping between us and the little tent. Of course they ought to have been awake, but fatigue had overcome them and there they slumbered, seated on the ground, their heads hanging forward almost upon their knees. An idea came to me. If we could kill those men without waking the others in that gloom, it might be possible to rescue Inez at once. Rapidly I weighed the pros and cons of such an attempt. Its advantages, if successful, were that the object of our pursuit would be carried through without further trouble, and that it was most doubtful whether we should ever get such a chance again. If we returned to fetch the others and attacked in force, the probability was that those Amahagger, or one of them, would hear some sound made by the advance of a number of men and fly into the darkness, or rather than lose Inez, they might kill her. Or if they stood and fought, she might be slain in the scrimmage. Or, as after all we had only about a dozen effectives, for the Stratmore bearers could not be relied upon, they might defeat and kill us whom they outnumbered by 2 or 3 to 1. These were the arguments for the attempt. Those for not making it were equally obvious. To begin with, it was one of extraordinary risk. The two guards or someone else behind them might wake up, for such people, like dogs, mostly sleep with one eye open, especially when they knew that they are being pursued. Or if they did not, we might bungle the business so that they raised an outcry before they grew silent for ever, in which case both of us and perhaps Inez also would probably pay the penalty before we could get away. Such was the horned dilemma upon one point or other of which we ran the risk of being impaled. For a full minute or more I considered the matter with an earnestness almost amounting to mental agony, and at last all but came to the conclusion that the danger was too enormous. It would be better, notwithstanding the many disadvantages of that plan, to go back and fetch the others. But then it was that I made one of my many mistakes in life. Most of us do more foolish things than wise ones, and sometimes I think that in spite of a certain reputation for caution and far-sightedness, I am exceptionally cursed in this respect. Indeed, when I look back upon my past, I can scarcely see the scanty flowers of wisdom that decorate its path because of the fat, ugly trees of error by which it is overshadowed. On that occasion, forgetting past experiences where Hans was concerned, my natural tendency to blunder took the form of relying upon another's judgment instead of my own. Although I had formed a certain view as to what should be done, the pros and cons seemed so evenly balanced that I determined to consult the little Hottentot and accept his verdict. This after all was but a form of gambling like pitch and toss, since, although it is true Hans was a clever, or at any rate a cunning man according to his lights, and experienced, it meant that I was placing my own judgment in abeyance, which no one considering a life and death enterprise should do, taking the chance of that of another, whatever it might be. However, not for the first time, I did so, to my grief. In the tiniest of whispers, with my lips right against his smelly head, I submitted the problem to Hans, asking him what we should do, go on or go back. He considered a while, then answered in a voice which he contrived to make like the drone of a night beetle. "Those men are fast asleep. I know it by their breathing. Also the Baas has the great medicine. Therefore I say, go on, kill them and rescue Sad Eyes." Now I saw that the fate to which I had appealed had decided against me and that I must accept their decree. With a sick and sinking heart, for I did not at all like the business, I wondered for a moment what had led Hans to make this view, which was directly opposite to any I had expected from him. Of course his superstition about the Great Medicine had something to do with it, but I felt convinced that this was not all. Even then I guessed that two arguments appealed to him, of which the first was that he desired, if possible, to put an end to this intolerable and unceasing hunt which had worn us all out, no matter what the end might be. The second and more powerful, however, was, I believed, and rightly, that the idea of this stealthy midnight blow appealed irresistibly to the craft of his half wild nature, in which the strange of the leopard and the snake seemed to mingle with that of the human being. For be it remembered that notwithstanding his veneer of civilization, Hans was a savage whose forefathers for countless ages had preserved themselves alive by means of such attacks and stratagems. The die having been cast, in the same infinitesimal whispers we made our arrangements, which were few and simple. They amounted to this, that we were to creep on to the men and each of us kill that one who was opposite to him, I with the axe and Hans with his knife, remembering that it must be done with a single stroke, that is, if they did not wake up and kill us, after which we were to get Enis out of her shelter, dressed or undressed, and make off with her into the darkness, where we were pretty sure of being able to baffle pursuit until we reached our camp. Provided that we could kill the two guards in the proper fashion, rather a large proviso, I admit. The thing was simple as shelling peas, which, notwithstanding the proverb, in my experience is not simple at all, since generally the shells crack the wrong way and at least one of the peas remained in the pod. So it happened in this case, for Janee, whom we had both forgotten, remained in the pod. I am sure I don't know why we overlooked her. Indeed, the error was inexcusable, especially as Hans had already experienced her foolishness and she was lying there before our eyes. I suppose that our minds were so concentrated upon the guard killing and the tragic and impressive Enis that there was no room in them for the stolid and matter-of-fact Janee. At any rate she proved to be the pea that would not come out of the pod. Often in my life I have felt terrified, not being by nature one of those who rejoices in dangers and wild adventures for their own sake, which only the stupid do, but who has, on the contrary, been forced to undertake them by the pressure of circumstances, a kind of hydraulic force that no one can resist, and who, having undertaken, has been carried through them, triumphing over the shrinkings of his flesh by some secret reserve of nerve power. Almost I am tempted to call it spirit power, something that lives beyond and yet inspires our frail and fallible bodies. Well, rarely have I been more frightened than I was at this moment. Actually I hung back until I saw that Hans, slithering through the grass like a thick yellow snake with a great knife in his right hand, was quite a foot ahead of me. Then my pride came to the rescue and I spurted, if one can spurt upon one's stomach, and drew level with him. After this we went at a pace so slow that any able-bodied snail would have left us standing still. Inch by inch we crept forward, lying motionless a while after each convulsive movement, once for quite a long time, since the left-hand cannibal seemed about to wake up, for he opened his mouth and yawned. If so, he changed his mind and rolling from a sitting posture onto his side, went to sleep much more soundly than before. A minute or so later the right-hand ruffian, my man, also stirred so sharply that I thought he had heard something. Apparently, however, he was only haunted by dreams resulting from an evil life, or perhaps by the prescience of its end, for after waving his arms and muttering something in a frightened voice, he too, wearied out, poor devil, sank back into sleep. At last we were on them, but paused because we could not see exactly where to strike, and knew, each of us, that our first blow must be the last and fatal. A cloud had come up and dimmed what light there was, and we must wait for it to pass. It was a long wait, or so it seemed. At length that cloud did pass, and in faint outline I saw the classical head of my Amahagger bowed in deep sleep. With a heart beating as it does only in the fierce extremities of love or war, I hissed like a snake, which was our agreed signal. Then, rising to my knees, I lifted the Zulu axe and struck with all my strength. The blow was straight and true. Umslopogaas himself could not have dealt a better. The victim in front of me uttered no sound and made no movement, only sank gently onto his side, and there lay as dead as though he had never been born. It appeared that Hans had done equally well, since the other man kicked out his long legs, which struck me on the knees. Then he also became strangely still. In short, both of them were stone dead, and would tell no stories this side of Judgment Day. Recovering my axe, which had been wrenched from my hand, I crept forward and opened the curtain-like rugs or blankets, I do not know which they were, that covered Enis. I heard her stir at once. The movement had wakened her, since captives sleep lightly. "Make no noise, Enis," I whispered. "It is I, Allan Quatermain, come to rescue you. Slip out and follow me. Do you understand?" "Yes, quite," she whispered back and began to rise. At this moment a blood-curdling yell seemed to fill earth and heaven, a yell at the memory of which even now I feel faint, although I am writing years after its echoes died away. I may as well say at once that it came from Janee, who, awaking suddenly, had perceived against the background of the sky Hans standing over her, looking like a yellow devil with a long knife in his hand, which she thought was about to be used to murder her. So, lacking self-restraint, she screamed in the most lusty fashion, for her lungs were excellent and the game was up. Instantly every man sleeping round the fire leapt to his feet and rushed in the direction of the echoes of Janee's yell. It was impossible to get Enis free of her tent arrangement or to do anything except whisper to her, "Feign sleep and know nothing. We will follow you. Your father is with us." Then I bolted back into the bushes, which Hans had reached already. A minute or two later, when we were clear of the hubbub and nearing our own camp, Hans remarked to me sententiously, "The Great Medicine worked well, Baas, but not quite well enough for what medicine can avail against a woman's folly." "It was our own folly we should blame," I answered. "We ought to have known that fool girl would shriek and taken precautions." "Yes, Baas, we ought to have killed her too, for nothing else would have kept her quiet," replied Hans in cheerful assent. "Now we shall have to pay for our mistake, for the hunt must go on." At this moment we stumbled across Robertson and Umslopogaas, who with the others and every living thing within a mile or two had also heard Janee's yell, and briefly told our story. When he learned how near we had been to rescuing his daughter, Robertson groaned, but Umslopogaas only said, "Well, there are two less of the men-eaters left to deal with. Still, for once your wisdom failed you, Macumazahn. When you had found the camp, you should have returned, so that we might all attack it together. Had we done so before dawn, there would not have been one of them left." "Yes," I answered, "I think that my wisdom did fail me. if I have any to fail. But come, perhaps we may catch them yet." So we advanced, Hans and I showing the road, but when we reached the place it was too late, for all that remained of the Amahagger or of Enis and Janee were the two dead men whom we had killed, and in that darkness pursuit was impossible. So we went back to our camp to rest and await the dawn before taking up the trail, only to find ourselves confronted with a new trouble. All the Stratmore half-breeds, whom we had left behind as useless, had taken advantage of our absence and that of the Zulus to desert. They had just bolted back upon our tracks and vanished into the sea of bush. What became of them I do not know, as we never saw them again, but my belief is that these cowardly fellows all perished, for certainly not one of them reached Stratmore. Fortunately for us, however, they departed in such a hurry that they left all their loads behind them, and even some of the guns they carried. Evidently Janee's yell was the last straw which broke the back of such nerve as remained to them. Doubtless they believed it to be the signal of attack by hordes of cannibals. As there was nothing to said or done, since any pursuit of these curs was out of the question, we made the best of things as they were. It proved a simple business. From the loads we selected such articles as were essential, ammunition for the most part to carry ourselves, and the rest we abandoned, hiding it under a pile of stones in case we should ever come that way again. The guns they had thrown aside we distributed among the Zulus who had none, though the thought that they possessed them, so far as I was concerned, added another terror to life. The prospect of going into battle with those wild axemen letting off bullets in every direction was not pleasant, but fortunately when that crisis came, they cast them away and reverted to the weapons to which they were accustomed. Now all this sounds much like a tale of disaster, or at any rate of failure. It is, however, wonderful by what strange ways good results are brought about. So much so that at times I think that these seeming accidents must be arranged by an intelligence superior to our own, to fulfil through us purposes of which we know nothing, and frequently, be it admitted, of a nature sufficiently obscure. Of course this is a fatalistic doctrine, but then, as I have said before, within certain limits I am a fatalist. To take the present case, for instance, the whole Enis episode at first sight might appear to be an excrescence on my narrative, of which the object is to describe how I met a certain very wonderful woman and what I heard and experienced in her company. Yet it is not really so, since had it not been for the Enis adventure, it is quite clear that I should never have reached the home of this woman, if woman she were, or have seen her at all. Before long this became very obvious to me, as shall be told. From the night upon which Hans and I failed to rescue Enis, we had no more difficulty in following the trail of the cannibals, who thenceforward were never more than a few hours ahead of us and had no time to be careful or to attempt to hide their spoor. Yet so fast did they travel that, do what we would, burdened and wearied as we were, it proved impossible to overtake them. For the first 3 days the track ran on through a scattered rolling bush veld of the character that I have described, but tending continually downhill. When we broke camp on the morning of the 4th day, eating a hasty meal at dawn, for now game had become astonishingly plentiful, so that we did not lack food, the rising sun showed beneath us an endless sea of billowy mist stretching in every direction, far as the sight could carry. To the north, however, it did come to an end, for there, as I judged 50 or 60 miles away, rose the grim outline of what looked like a huge fortress, which I knew must be one of those extraordinary mountain formations, probably owing their origin to volcanic action, that are to be met with here and there in the vast expanses of Central and Eastern Africa. Being so distant, it was impossible to estimate its size, which I guessed must be enormous, but in looking at it I bethought me of that great mountain in which Zikali said the marvellous White Queen lived, and wondered whether it could be the same, as from my memory of his map upon the ashes it well might be. That is, if such a place existed at all. If so, the map had shown it as surrounded by swamps and, well, surely that mist hid the face of a mighty swamp? It did indeed, since before nightfall, following the spoor of those Amahagger, we had plunged into a morass so vast that in all my experience I have never seen or heard of its like. It was a veritable ocean of papyrus and other reeds, some of them a dozen or more feet high, so that it was impossible to see a yard in any direction. Here it was that the Amahagger ahead of us proved our salvation, since without them to guide us we must soon have perished. For through that gigantic swamp there ran a road, as I think an ancient road, since in one or two places I saw stonework which must have been laid by man. Yet it was not a road which it would have been possible to follow without a guide, seeing that it also was overgrown with reeds. Indeed, the only difference between it and the surrounding swamp was that on the road the soil was comparatively firm, that is to say, one seldom sank into it above the knee, whereas on either side of it quagmires were often apparently bottomless and, what is more, partook of the nature of quicksand. This we found out soon after we entered the swamp, since Robertson, pushing forward with a fierce eagerness which seemed to consume him, neglected to keep his eye upon the spoor and stepped off the edge onto the land that appeared to be exactly similar to its surface. Instantly he began to sink in greasy and tenacious mud. Umslopogaas and I were only 20 yards behind, yet by the time we reached him in answer to his shouts already he was engulfed up to his middle, and going down so rapidly that in another minute he would have vanished altogether. Well, we got him out, but not with ease, for that mud clung to him like the tentacles of an octopus. After this we were more careful. Nor did this road run straight. On the contrary, it curved about and sometimes turned at right angles, doubtless to avoid a piece of swamp over which it had proved impossible for the ancients to construct a causeway, or to follow some outcrop of harder soil beneath. The difficulties of that horrible place are beyond description, and indeed can scarcely be imagined. First there was that of a kind of grass which grew among the roots of the reeds and had edges like those of knives. As Robertson and I wore gaiters, we did not suffer so much from it, but the poor Zulus with their bare legs were terribly cut about and in some cases lame. Then there were the mosquitoes which lived here by the million and all seemed anxious for a bite. Also snakes of a peculiarly deadly kind were numerous. A Zulu was bitten by one of them of so poisonous a nature that he died within 3 minutes, for the venom seemed to go straight to his heart. We threw his body into the swamp, where it vanished at once. Lastly, there was the all-pervading stench and the intolerable heat of the place, since no breath of air could penetrate that forest of reeds, while a minor trouble was that of the multitude of leeches which fastened to our bodies. By looking one could see the creatures sitting on the underside of leaves with their heads stretched out, waiting to attack anything that went by. As wayfarers there could not have been numerous, I wondered what they had lived on for the last few thousand years. By the way, I found that paraffin, of which we had a small supply for our hand lamps, rubbed over all exposed surfaces, was to some extent a protection against these blood-sucking worms and the gnats, although it did make one go about smelling like a dirty oil tin. During the day, except for the occasional rush of some great iguana or other reptile, and the sound of the wings of the flocks of wild fowl passing over us from time to time, the march was deathly silent. But at night it was different, for then the bullfrogs boomed incessantly, as did the bitterns, while great swamp owls and other night-flying birds uttered their weird cries. Also there were mysterious sucking noises caused, no doubt, by the sinking of areas of swamp, with those of bursting bubbles of foul uprushing gas. Strange lights, too, played about the will-o'-the-wisps or St. Elmo's fires, as I believe they are called, that frightened the Zulus very much, since they believed them to be spirits of the dead. Perhaps this superstition had something to do with their native legend that mankind was torn out of the reeds. If so, they may have imagined that the ghosts of men went back to the reeds, of which there were enough here to accommodate those of the entire Zulu nation. Anyway, they were much scared. Even the bold witch doctor Goroko was scared and went through incantations with a little bag of medicines he carried to secure protection for himself and his companions. Indeed, I think even the iron Umslopogaas himself was not as comfortable as he might have been, although he did inform me that he had come out to fight and did not care whether it were with man or wizard or spirit. In short, of all the journeys that I have made, with the exception of the passage of the desert on our way to King Solomon's mines, I think that through this enormous swamp was the most miserable. Heartily did I curse myself for ever having undertaken such a quest in a wild attempt to allay that sickness, or rather to quench that thirst of the soul which, I imagine, at times assails most of those who have hearts and think or dream. For this was at the bottom of the business. This it was which had delivered me into the hands of Zikali, Opener of Roads, who, as now I am sure, was merely making use of me for his private occult purposes. He desired to consult the distant oracle, if such a person existed, as to great schemes of his own, and therefore, to attain his end, made use of my secret longings which I had been so foolish as to reveal to him, quite careless of what happened to me in the process. A bit narrow and uncharitable view, this view. It seems to me that Zikali is taking a big risk in giving him the great medicine. J.B. Well, I was in for the business and must follow it to the finish, whatever that might be. After all, it was very interesting, and if there were anything in what Zikali said, if there were not, I could not conceive what object he had in sending me on such a wild goose chase through this home of geese and ducks. It might become more interesting still, for being pretty well fever-proof, I did not think I should die in that morass, as of course 9 white men out of 10 would have done. And beyond it lay the huge mountain, which day by day grew larger and clearer. Nor did Hans, who with a childlike trust pinned his faith to the Great Medicine. This he remarked was the worst veld through which he had ever travelled, but as the Great Medicine would never consent to be buried in that stinking mud, he had no doubt that we should come safely through it some time. I replied that this wonderful medicine of his had not saved one of our companions who had now made a grave in the same mud. "No, Baas," he said, "but those Zulus have nothing to do with the medicine which was given to you and to me who accompanied you when we saw the Opener of Roads. Therefore perhaps they will all die, except Umslopogaas, whom you were told to take with you. If so, what does it matter, since there are plenty of Zulus, although there be but one Macumazahn or one Hans? Also the Baas may remember that he began by offending a snake, and therefore it is quite natural that this snake's brother should have bitten the Zulu." "If you are right, he should have bitten me, Hans." "Yes, Baas, and so no doubt he would have done had you not been protected by the Great Medicine, and me too, had not my grandfather been a snake charmer, to say nothing of the smell of the medicine being on me as well. The snakes know those that they should bite, Baas." "So do the mosquitoes," I answered, grabbing a handful of them. "The Great Medicine has no effect upon them." "Oh yes, Baas, it has, since though it pleases them to bite, the bites do us no harm, or at least not much, and all are made happy.
Still I wish we could get out of these reeds of which I never want to see another. And Baas, please keep your rifle ready, for I think I hear a crocodile stirring there."
"No need, Hans," I remarked sarcastically. "Go and tell him that I have the Great Medicine."
"Yes, Baas, I will. Also that if he is very hungry there are some Zulus camped a few yards further down the road."
And he went solemnly to the reeds a little way off and began to talk to them. "You infernal donkey," I murmured and drew my blanket over my head in a vain attempt to keep out the mosquitoes, and smoking furiously with the same object, tried to get to sleep. At last the swamp bottom began to slope upwards a little, with the result that as the land dried through natural drainage, the reeds grew thinner by degrees, until finally they ceased and we found ourselves on firmer ground. Indeed, upon the lowest slopes of the great mountain that I have mentioned, that now towered above us, forbidden and majestic. I had made a little map in my pocket book of the various twists and turns of the road through the vast Slough of Despond, marking them from hour to hour as we followed its devious wanderings. On studying this at the end of that part of our journey, I realised afresh how utterly impossible it would have been for us to thread that misty maze where a few false steps would always have meant death by suffocation, had it not been for the spoor of those Amahagger travelling immediately ahead of us who were acquainted with its secrets. Had they been friendly guides they could not have done us a better turn. What I wondered was why they had not tried to ambush us in the reeds, since our fires must have shown them that we were close upon their heels. That they did try to burn us out was clear from certain evidences that I found, but fortunately at this season of the year, in the absence of a strong wind, the rank reeds were too green to catch fire. For the rest I was soon to learn the reason of their neglect to attack us in that dense cover. They were waiting for a better opportunity. End of chapter 9 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander.